we will be able to work in partnership with many of you towards addressing those inequities and creating change for children and families in our communities. My computer does not want to advance to the next slide. I'm keeping on tapping it, nothing's happening. Here we go, so I didn't click there on that. Yeah. Sorry guys. We've been doing webinars at HELP for a few years now, and I should be getting better at it, but I've been away on a holiday and I think I've lost the webinar to webinar neuron connection, so hopefully it won't be too painful for all of you. So as many of you know, we were at the Human Early Learning Partnership, the first jurisdiction in the world to collect population level data on children's development. And when I'm looking at the list of attendees, I know that for many of you, this has been an endeavor that you've partnered with us on for many years. So certainly are very familiar with the work that we have done collecting EDI data. I always like to think of it as basically a census on all of the 5-year-olds in British Columbia, looking at different aspects of their development when they enter kindergarten. And just a brief reminder for those of you who may be less familiar with the EDI, we collect the data in kindergarten because that's really our first opportunity to have access to all 5-year-olds. But it really is not designed to tell us anything about school or anything about teachers. It's really designed to be a reflection on what has come before school. So there is the EDI. Really, I've always talked about the EDI work as really the mothership at HELP. It has been the foundation of the work that we've done here over the past 12 years and really been our key piece of research that hopefully is a catalyst for action in communities. As I said, it's collected by kindergarten teachers. It's about 104 items that looks at each of these aspects of development: communication skills, physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, and language and cognitive development. We have, as the title suggests, been collecting EDI for over 12 years now. Actually started the first pilot of EDI, took place in Vancouver in the 1999-2000 school year. So that was really more than 12 years. But we started the province-wide collection, as you can see from this slide, in 2001. So for the past 12 years, we have been using the data across the province. And currently in our EDI database, we have about 200,000, a little bit more than 200,000 EDIs completed. And you know, the power of having that population level database cannot be overestimated. You know, a lot of research relies on small samples of people, and you'll often hear, you know, about confidence intervals and all of those kinds of things. We really are, we don't have to worry about those kinds of things because we really are looking at the population of children in BC. What I'm mostly going to talk about today is the results that we had in Wave 5. So that was the data that was collected in 2011-12 and 2012-13 school years in BC. We have started now on Wave 6. For those of you who are interested, we're having a very small EDI year this year, just working with some of the smallest school districts in the province as a way to build their numbers in the sample. Before I go on to talk a little bit more about the results, I just want to check to see if anyone has any questions about the EDI, its completion, its analysis, any of those kinds of things. You can either raise your hand or you can chat, and I think I see that Roxana has a question, and so will Roxana type in the question? What is EDI? There's a very good question. So EDI is Early Development instrument, and as it is a population level tool completed by kindergarten teachers across the province. And I would really encourage those of you who are less familiar with the EDI to go to our website and to look at some of the background materials on the instrument. You can also look at the instrument itself, so if you're interested in what the 104 items say, what the teachers are asked to report on, you can find all of that there. So I would encourage you to do that, and then if you have questions, to actually contact either Madison or somebody else on our EDI team to have those answered for you. EDI is now collected in every part of Canada except for Nunavut. It's collected across the whole country of Australia. We have a lot of communities that we're working with across the U.S. We have EDI in Pakistan this year, Peru, so it's become quite an internationally known tool. Okay, so let's move on. I don't know, Roxana still has her hand raised. Whether you have a question, Roxana, please type it in if you do, and we'll make sure that we answer that. Sometimes those little hands, no, we can't do video. You're asking if there was a way to see me. Thankfully, we're all sitting here in our pajamas at the Human Early Learning Partnership, and we don't have to show our faces. But no, we're not able to on this technology. We are, though, able to record the webinar, and so this will be available if there's any interest in it afterwards. So moving on to the kinds of things that we have been learning using the EDI, or Early Development Instrument. The primary analysis that we do is we look at childhood vulnerability. And we know by our definition of vulnerability that that's the kind of challenge that is going to stick with children over time. So one of the things that we do at HELP is that we link our vulnerability rates to how children are doing later on in school. And we can see very clearly that vulnerability is depressingly predictive of how children are going to do later on in their school years. And with everything that we know about the importance of the early years, the science of how the brain develops in the early years, that really isn't very surprising. So we know clearly that those early years are critical to later success and later health and well-being. And so that's why it's so important for us. You know, this is really, I think, the key difference that makes a difference. You know, children going to school, beginning their educational journey in this vulnerable category, you know, is sort of akin to them starting that journey with a big boulder on their back and pushing it, you know, uphill the whole way. So it really is the key difference that makes a difference for us at the Human Early Learning Partnership, that if we're ever going to level the playing field and decrease the inequity amongst children, it is about providing them all with that quality experience in their early years so that they're not entering kindergarten in that vulnerable range. This number that you see on the screen is the results, the provincial result from 2007, or the end of Wave 2. And at that time, 29%, or about a third of our kids, were vulnerable in at least one aspect of their development. So now if we fast forward to the end of Wave 5, so the end of last year's results, you can see that in 2013, in fact, that number has gone up to 33%, or about a third of kids in British Columbia in that vulnerable range, or vulnerable in at least one aspect of their development. So not a good news story, and not certainly the results that all of us who are committed to trying to create quality environments for young children and their families want to see, because we've been working pretty hard over the last 12 years to make a difference. And so thinking about what really is contributing to that increasing vulnerability and what collectively we might be able to do to take it on. Someone, Spring ECE, has raised their hand. If you want to type in a question, Spring. I don't know if your name is Spring. It likely isn't, but please go ahead and type in your question, and then we'll be able to respond. Okay, so just to move on, again, keeping with the theme of the differences that make a difference, what we see in those two numbers, at 29% overall vulnerability at the end of wave 2 and the 33% at the end of wave 5, is really a critically different increase in overall vulnerability. And as many of you will know who have worked closely with us, we've done some statistical work in the last couple of years to really understand what are statistically significant or critically different increases in vulnerability, whether you look at the level of the province, whether you look at a school district, or whether you look at a neighborhood. How much change is really significant change. And we know in looking in that 29% to 33% number over time that that is a significant change. And so what it's saying to us is that more children certainly are vulnerable in BC now than they were in 2007. So the next question obviously becomes, why, and what are the things that we can be looking at to see if we can determine a solution to reverse that number. And you see on this slide a quote that actually comes from Clyde, and many of you have probably seen the interview that Clyde did with Maria LaRose when he was doing a guest lecture at the Dalai Lama Center, and she asked him this very same question when he talked about how vulnerability was increasing in BC, and she said to him, "Why do you think that is?" And his response was this: something very big is happening to family life in British Columbia, and really is a sea change in respect to the kinds of pressures that families are under as they're trying to balance that role of caring for their children while earning a living and being able to manage financially. And over time, and interestingly, we have a throne speech today in BC, so maybe that will show that we are going to have a bit more investment, but so far the investment has not been significant enough. I see that there's a question from June. Thank you, June. Just checking in as to whether or not these kinds of trends in vulnerability are unique to British Columbia, and they certainly are not. We do the EDI, as I said, across the country, and we're seeing similar trends in most parts of the country. It's a little deeper. It's a little bit of a bigger increase in BC, and we attribute that primarily to the challenges of the economy in BC. There's certainly no more expensive place to live in the country than Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, and families with young children are certainly getting squeezed out of that. So I think that we see a little bit bigger increase in BC, but the trends, and when we look at the scale-to-scale trends, in a few minutes we'll see that those kinds of trends are consistent across the country. And I know that many of you are familiar with the work of my colleagues here at HELP, Paul Kershaw and Lynelle Anderson, and really they're thinking about the importance of providing policy and public investment to allow parents to have the time, resources, and supportive services that they need to, again, to balance that caring and earning responsibility with their children. So, there's a couple of whys, and this is certainly the biggest one in terms of we haven't invested what we could in family policy, in early child development, and we need to continually be advocating for broader public investment. I always think it's important, though, to also think about the cultural trends, I suppose, that we have broadly in westernized society, I think, and many of these things are not in the interests of children's development. It's important for us to remind ourselves of these because even if we had all of this policy investment, some of these trends would still continue to exist, and collectively we need to think about what they are and think about what we can do as community members and early childhood champions to reverse some of these things. Technology is my particular soapbox, as many of you will know. The use of technology or any kind of screen time for children under 2 years old is clearly not supported. The American Pediatric Society has come out with a statement that says no screen time for kids under 2. The Canadian Pediatric Society has done the same thing. So really starting to think about how we can make the most of technology. Obviously, it's a huge bonus benefit to all of us in terms of the way that we have access to information, the options we have to communicate with one another, and I certainly wouldn't want to say that it was all bad, but it is all bad for wee kids before 2 years old, and then in those 2 to 5 year old age time, making sure that kids are having a balance of time to maybe play on the iPad, but also make sure that they're outside and not not spending too much time on those things. I'm saying that after I've been telling everybody that I watched 9 hours of the Olympics yesterday. Anyway, that's an aside. Okay, lack of physical activity certainly related to this, and we all know that obesity rates in Canada are rising dramatically amongst children, a combination of a lack of physical activity and poor dietary choices. So that, again, another big reason why childhood vulnerability in BC and other places is increasing. Nutrition certainly, and lots of challenges again that come back to some of the economic questions we raised in terms of the cost of healthy food and how often things that are less healthy for families are more affordable, and trying to find a way that we're advocating for proper nutrition and its accessibility to healthy food. Bubble-wrapped children. This is a really big area, I think, for us as community members and many of us as parents to be thinking about in terms of the trends in children's development now to protect our children from conflict and disappointment. The article that I always recommend is called "Raising a Nation of Wimps," and it really is, those days of kids being able to be out in the world where they have to make independent decisions, where they have to solve conflicts with their peers, whether they have to deal with the environment and know that if they walk by the dog that it could bark and scare them, and those kinds of things are good for children's development. And so trying to find a way in our often fear-based society that we can allow kids to be free. And we live such a more structured life now, and a lot of that is required. And I had somebody tell me that we need to think about how we structure freedom, which seems a bit paradoxical, of course, but really, given that kids are going to be in structured activities a lot of the time, how can we create those environments where we're still giving them the opportunity to develop independence, solve conflicts, all of those kinds of things. So that's really what bubble-wrapped children is really just protecting our children from everything that can possibly disappoint them. An achievement focus, and I think a lot of this comes back to the fact that as parents, we all want the best for our kids. We all want to think that our kids are going to have the most competitive advantage, whether it's in math or science or in hockey or soccer or classical piano. But it means that we spend a lot of time with our kids, getting them to activities, especially young kids, you know, teaching them to speak French or play violin or those kinds of things that can be wonderfully nurturing to children, but it's not in their interest to be running from one activity to the other, and then when they're around home to have to be spending a lot of time practicing or doing homework for those kinds of things. So that would be another thing for us to think about. And then the increase in diagnosed difficulties and where that comes from. Lots of things for us to think about. We now have a 1 in 84 children in British Columbia are diagnosed as on the autism spectrum. So it's a huge challenge for us, and something that has been increasing dramatically over the last 5 to 6 years. So these are all things that I think are contributing to the increase in childhood vulnerability in British Columbia, and obviously these are not things for which there are easy and quick fixes. They're things that we have developed as a society over many generations. But I think it's important for all of us to start to challenge them, to not sort of think that, you know, these trends are, you know, the horse is out of the barn on the technology and we can't rein it in, or, you know, we live in a society where we can't let our kids run outside and play. All of these things that we kind of take as fact now, and they don't need to be fact. Give you another Clydeism. We're celebrating the anniversary of Clyde this week. As many of you know, he died almost exactly a year ago. So we actually have our hallway, our stairway to the building we're in, which is on the 4th floor. People have chalked messages all the way up the four stories with Clyde, with lots of sayings that Clyde had. So many of them are in my mind. But the one I was going to tell you about was, it doesn't have to be this way. And Clyde was very clear that, you know, we don't have to accept things in the world that we don't think are right. And so I think these are some of the trends in children's development that we have to take on. Yes, I'm coming for a question to Roxana.
Unmuted.
Roxana. Go ahead, Roxana. You are unmuted. Can you hear me, Roxana?
Yes, sorry, my mistake.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
No, I didn't have questions. Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, I believe Pollyanna has a question?
Yes.
Go ahead, Pollyanna.
I have a question. Like when you talk about technology and the age to start to use, you say it's when they have like a 12 years old, or I don't know if I understand. Like when they are under 12 years old, it's not good to use technology. It's like to keep maybe doing another activities.
The recommendation from the Canadian Pediatric Society and the American Pediatric Society is that there's no screen time of any kind. So that's iPads, iPhones, televisions, before children are 2 years old. Okay, we have another question from Spring. Go ahead, Spring.
I just want to know more about like the bubble wrapped children. So maybe you can give a clear define.
Sure.
So from what you said, I got it's not the bubble wrap the children. It's about parents overprotect the children from disappointment. Is that correct?
That's certainly part of it, and it's not only parents, but just generally how we don't allow our children to have the same level of independence that they have had in past generations, and part of that is because of our fears, and part of it is because we're highly programmed and structured, and so kids just are not getting the opportunities to go out and roam around the neighborhood in the way that they used to do, and that roaming around the neighborhood was really an important part of children's development. I would really encourage you, Spring, to be in touch with me, and I'm happy to give you a couple of other references on this, so things that you might want to read. Okay. Hello. I hope you guys can hear me again. Lost all the sound. Yes, you can hear me again. Thank you very much. Sorry, we had a little technical problem there. So I wanted to talk a little bit, as I said, one of the differences that make a difference from our perspective that's a really positive one, and certainly to celebrate, is the Aboriginal language recognition rate. So again, some of you may know there is one question on the Early Development Instrument, the EDI, that asks teachers to identify the heritage language group that Aboriginal children in their class belong to. So not just that the child is Aboriginal, but maybe they're from New Chalmers or Cowichan or Comox. So really getting teachers to think about more deeply about children's Aboriginal identity. And we did this certainly with the leadership of Michelle Sam when this got started, really is a recognition that the importance of connection to culture and connection to language in terms of children's sense of well-being. So as you can see from the numbers here, and it's not direct comparison because we improved the question each year too so that we would get better answers, but I still think that, as you can see, in 08-09, of all of the Aboriginal children in the province, teachers could link them to a culture and language group only 4.4% of the time in 08-09. And you can see that that number has gone up each year, 09-10 up to 12.3%, 10-11, 12.9%, and then you can see in the last 2 years up to 30.8%, and in 12-13 up to 68.9, or nearly 70% of the children who were identified as Aboriginal by their teacher. Those teachers could also link them to a heritage language and culture group, and that to us is something tremendous to celebrate, and really a credit to the teachers in terms of thinking more about that. And so this is something that we really think is an important difference that we're seeing around the province. I'm going to talk a little bit now. I'm sure your eyes are getting glazed over with all of that information. Well, why do I think, I have a question from Vanessa. Thank you very much, Vanessa, about why I think this increased so dramatically. Are you guys getting sound from me? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Why I think it increased so dramatically, I really think it's a training issue as much as anything. So in the EDI training that we do now, we really spend a lot of time with teachers helping them think about this question. And so I think that's been a direct impact. And it's really great because I know that there are kindergarten teachers who, when they have a child come into their classroom in September who is an Aboriginal child, right away they're thinking about having to fill out the EDI, and they start to think, okay, I need to find out a little bit more about where this girl or boy comes from, and what is their heritage, language, and culture group. So I think that it's really an exciting change that we're seeing. So I've got us on now to looking at the different aspects of children's development and the trends in vulnerability over the past 12 years. And as you can see there on the top line, that's the overall vulnerability. So that's the 29 to 33% that we looked at earlier. And then the lower lines are the different aspects of children's development measured by the EDI. And if you remember back to the EDI pie chart that I talked about earlier, you would remember that there's language and cognitive development, social competence, emotional maturity, physical health and well-being, and communication skills and general knowledge. And what we see in this graph is that the communication skills, so that's the orange line, has stayed relatively flat over time. It was in Wave 2 the biggest contributor to childhood vulnerability in BC, and it stayed fairly constant while some of the other kinds of development, the vulnerability there has gone up. Particularly, we've seen increases in the physical, social, and emotional development. And the one area where we've seen a decrease in vulnerability, and what we're certainly celebrating, is in the language and cognitive development scale. And so where all other kinds of children's development vulnerability has been increasing over the last many years, for language and cognitive development, it's been decreasing. And I think we really do need to celebrate that as a difference that makes a difference. We know that children are coming to school more ready in the sense of the traditional ABCs of school readiness, so more likely to be able to read or write a sentence, more likely to be able to have some basic numeracy skills. So that is a very positive thing, and I think that we've had a lot of attention, both programmatic attention and public education attention, to the importance of early literacy. At the same time, we do see these increases, particularly in the social and emotional domains, and that is of big concern to us. We know very much that the incidence of child and youth mental health issues is increasing, and we know that those later mental health issues have their roots in early social and emotional development. And so it's really now celebrating the improvement on language and cognitive development and thinking about how we can increase our investments and our attention and our effectiveness in terms of supporting children's social and emotional development. So I think moving forward, and I know that lots of you are engaged in activities at the local level to do just this, but it really is helping everyone to think collectively about these important social and emotional domains. And I had an interesting chat or email earlier with Lynn. I see that Lynn Reside is on this call today, talking about how we can interconnect social, emotional, and physical development, and also be thinking about the important connection between children and nature, and how we are learning more and more about how being in nature is really good for children's social and emotional development, at the same time giving them that physical activity. So I think there's getting to be much more awareness and a lot more efforts. Which of the changes in scales are statistically significant? They are all statistically significant because of the size of the population, and that would be a little bit different from when you looked at it neighborhood by neighborhood. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the statistical significance or critical difference today, but I would encourage you again to go to our website. There's really good materials that will show you how much change is critical difference, both for overall vulnerability and for each of the scales. Okay, I better get talking here because I'm running out of time. And I want to make sure we have a little bit of time at the end. So just wanted to highlight very quickly, again on the theme of differences that make a difference, that we have huge disparities across the province in terms of the percentage of kids vulnerable. In the last data collection, there was a low of 11% up to a high of 52% in school districts across the province. And I always say, think of how different it will be for a child who's in a kindergarten class where 11% of children are vulnerable compared to a child who's in a class where 52% of children are vulnerable, and knowing that those differences then are compounding and getting wider over time. We see the same kind of differences at the neighborhood level, only larger. We have divided the province into now 297 neighborhoods. We have neighborhoods in BC that are at a low of 4% of children vulnerable, up to a high of 56% of children vulnerable. We only have 7 neighborhoods out of the 297 that have less than 15% of children vulnerable. And for those of you who have been around for a while and working with HELP, you'll know that that 15% mark is one that we were wanting to shoot for as a level of vulnerability that we could really get to in most neighborhoods across BC. And so as you can see from our Wave 5 results, we have some way to go in respect to that. We have 58 neighborhoods in BC of the 297 where vulnerability is over 40%. So there's certainly a strong consideration in those neighborhoods in terms of how you're going to reduce that vulnerability. Questions on that? I went through a lot of material quickly. I see Enzi has a question. Go ahead, Enzi.
Yes, my question is about give me a little idea about how we can improve the cognitive and language domain.
Ideas on how we can improve the language and cognitive development domain? Is that your question? Yes.
Information about how we can improve cognitive and language domain in the kids.
I mean, the language and cognitive domain, it's an exact science in many ways, how you improve children's language development if they're exposed to a lot of language, interactive language, and I think that's a really important point to make, going back to the technology. So this is not just, listening to TV or, working with the iPad, but in terms of conversation with other children and adults around them. If you have a rich language environment, you're going to develop language. So there's some pretty direct ways that we can do that. There's a really interesting study out of the U.S. called the 30 million word gap, and it actually looks at how many words are spoken to children in different homes, and they're able to show that by the time children get to kindergarten age, that some children will have been exposed to as many as 30 million words less than other children. So that is a big factor. I have a question about the language and cognitive improvements and what did EDI do to help and improve it. I don't think that EDI specifically did anything to help to improve it. We had help along with people in communities and people in government. It really made early literacy and the importance of reading and talking to children a question of attention over the past many years, and I think that that is starting to pay off. But sometimes we worry too much about our kids' ability to read and write, and maybe not enough about our kids' ability to laugh and love. So that's where I think we can sort of start to switch in terms of really trying to focus in on the social and emotional and get people talking about that as well. So I'm going to finish off now with my content, and I'm sorry, for those of you who were at the expo, you know that this part of the presentation had the great benefit of having Helen Davidson and Lynn Reside and Dave Phillips and Jeff Colbeck actually contributing some of the things that they had been doing in communities to create change. And so I really would encourage you to connect with each other because I think that you're going to learn a lot about the differences that make a difference in communities through learning what's happening in communities around BC as well. And I can certainly play a role in facilitating those connections for you if you're interested in hooking up with anybody. But I want to just finish up with what we talk about as our lessons learned, the things that we see happening in communities that we know are making a difference to children's development in BC. And the first is this notion of collaboration. And in the past, you've probably heard me talk about this as the importance of senior leadership and senior leadership participating in the collaborative efforts in communities, and that's certainly one component of it. But I wanted today to broaden how people are thinking about this important practice and help people to think about how they can work collaboratively at all times. And it's not only about senior leaders, it's about all of us committed to young children in communities. And so it's that senior leadership, it's that getting together to create a common vision. It's about having long-term relationships with other people in your community that allows you to commit to work together. And it's also about having a little bit of a structure around the collaborative practice that gives you ways to make decisions and have committees and actually have a little bit of a way that helps you, a framework for working together. But we clearly know that in order to reduce childhood vulnerability in British Columbia, it is not one person, one organization, one ministry, one level of government that can make it happen. The only way that we can make it happen is in collaboration with one another, and this is why we so want to emphasize this point in talking about the differences that make a difference. We also know that understanding research, not only EDI, but local socioeconomic research, and we do hope to be putting out some new census data for all of you in terms of income level and family structure and whatnot before too long. As many of you will know, the 2011 census is a little bit problematic in terms of how it was collected, and so we're making some decisions about how usable that data is, but we will be putting out some new SES data that hopefully will be helpful to your focusing on research. We also know that it's important to address barriers to increase the access to services. I often like to say that the vulnerability in BC is not driven by children who are accessing services for the most part. We're getting pretty good at providing early quality childhood programs, but there's still lots of people for a variety of reasons who are not accessing them. And so how can we take what we know to be good quality programs and make them more accessible to people? So that is also something that we know is making a difference in communities. It's not necessarily new services or different services, but better access to the great services that we already have. And then the last is this point about the importance of the alignment between the early childhood system and the school system. And again, this speaks to the question of collaboration. And when, you know, the school system, the kindergarten to grade 12 system is the only universally accessible system we have for children in Canada. And so we need to build our early childhood approach from that universal system and make sure that we're working together. And then again, this speaks to the issue of relationships and the importance of engaging with municipal leaders and also with regional policymakers in terms of building your collaboration, not only within your own local neighborhoods and communities, but within your regions. Thank you. We have about maybe not quite 10 minutes, but a few minutes for questions. As I say, that was a lot of information, not even questions exclusively, but if people have comments or ideas they want to contribute to thinking about how communities are making a difference, it would be great. I believe Enzi has another question? No? Don't be shy. Remember, we're all sitting in our pajamas. Jamie has a question. Go ahead, Jamie. Jamie?
Hi, sorry. Has the EDI results, have they been looked at for particular subgroups of children rather than by neighborhoods? So Aboriginal children compared to the rest of the population, or is that sort of still early for that?
We do have the capacity to look at specific populations of children, so we collect information about Aboriginality, we collect information about multicultural kids or kids who speak English as a second language, and we are also beginning to think about some analysis in respect to the differences between boys and girls. So the one thing about having a population level data set is that it allows you to look at a whole bunch of subgroups and to start to consider how differences in different groups of children are playing out. So we have done a lot of language-specific analysis, which is very interesting work led by Connie Milbreath and Martin Goon here at HELP. You know, looking at how Punjabi-speaking kids are doing, Cantonese-speaking kids, those kinds of things, and really starting to think together with the school system and the early childhood system how the different trends for children's development from different language groups, how the system can ready itself for that. In respect to the analysis of the Aboriginal population, we are able to do that, and we work very closely here at HELP with an Aboriginal steering committee that guides all of our use of the Aboriginal specific data, and there are protocols in place, primarily that the Aboriginal Education Council in the community needs to be involved in requesting and using the data in order to release that data. So we don't release that data publicly, but you can, again, I'm directing you to the website where you'll find the information about how to request Aboriginal data. And I'll also take time, while I got all of you guys on the line, to tell you that we have a new Aboriginal Community Liaison Coordinator who happens to be sitting beside me. Her name is Kim Baer, and I'm sure that many of you will meet and hear from her over the next few months. She just started with us last week, so we're excited about that. Okay, next question. Have I thought of alignment with parents to eliminate vulnerability? Well, certainly, you know, parents are our children's primary place of development, and anything that has us reducing vulnerability means that we'll have to work collectively with parents. We have to be really careful, and I'm really cautious that when we talk about childhood vulnerability, that we're not blaming parents. Parents aren't receiving the support that they need to, again, you know, balance their very complex job of caring for their children while making their way in today's economy. So finding ways to inform parents about what's going on and to work together with them, I think, is really critical. And we do try to do lots of presentations to parents, work with parent groups, those kinds of things. But just always with that caution that you know, we're there to support parents, not to blame. Okay, how would I suggest someone on the west side of Vancouver engage with policymakers or municipal people? That's a great question. I think Vancouver is probably one of the easier places in the province to engage with people because they do have a social planning infrastructure. They do have some folks that are really interested in and working on child development questions in Vancouver. So I think of all of the municipalities in BC, Vancouver is the one that they, you know, they have a profile for some of these questions, and I find them really receptive to dialogue. So it really, you know, I have a couple of names for you, Donna. If you want to send me a note, I can send you some specific people to call in Vancouver. The other sort of broader question is thinking about how you engage, you know, municipal politicians. And I think it's really about trying to look at, you know, what are some of the things that are important to the municipal politicians in your area. And certainly in Vancouver, one of them is around, you know, outdoor activity and bike lanes and all of those things about being active, and really trying to connect with political folks around how their interests are actually melding with ours, and in this particular case, how those policies in terms of a more healthy, active lifestyle can also have a positive influence on children's development. How about single-parent families? So what the research tells us about single-parent families is that they do really well as two-parent families when they have support. And so again, it's really thinking about how we best support parents, whether they're in a single-parent family, single-parent home. You know, those social networks that we all need to do well in whatever our life journey is are really important, and doubly important for single parents because it can be, you know, an isolating place to be. But as I say, the research says when they have strong social networks and they have a living wage, let's not forget that, then their children will do just as well as children in two-parent families. So I'm not really sure if that's your question, but that's my answer. How can we get a copy of the webinar, and will it be possible to pass it on to parents who are unable to attend the webinar? Yes and yes. I mean, the copy is really just a video or an audio recording along with my slides, but it will be made available. Hi, Suzanne. I see this is your question. I think it would be really nice if you could talk with parents along with it. Like maybe it's an opportunity to convene some parents in your community and to listen to the webinar together, and then to think about some of the implications for those parents and their children. But certainly it will be available. Summary for today for us, yes, that will be available. How are you supporting parents? And I see what tools we have to help parents. Well, I think the greatest tools we have to help parents are actually all of you, and working with you in terms of getting information out to parents in a supportive way. One of the things that I think is the biggest challenge for parents of young children that I have an opportunity to talk to at present is just the amount of information that people have to wade through to find out, what's the truth, and, is it really true that you can toilet train your child at 2 days old and, they can sleep for 14 hours a day, those kinds of things, and really trying to cut through that for people and offer simple tools, and that's something that we're always working on here at HELP, is to try to get good information out. There's a really great resource that is I want to mention too, called the Encyclopedia for Child Development. It's hosted with a partner organization of ours in Quebec. And so if you Google it, it's just the Encyclopedia for Child Development. They have some really great resources there, and lots of them tailored for parents. Lesson learned, elaborate more about senior leadership. That's a great question, Christina. Thank you. So really that is about the fact that, we know that it is this collaboration that's necessary for effective change. So all of the various organizations and individuals that are involved in supporting families with young children coming together in a collaborative way. And we know that it's more effective if it's the senior folks in those organizations. So if it's the superintendent of schools, if it's the city manager, if it's the community services manager for the Ministry of Children and Family Development, or a senior person in the public health unit. And that's because they're able to then come together and make decisions about the allocation of resources, so they're actually able to make things happen more quickly than if you didn't have those senior folks. So a couple more questions, and then I know we're out of time. So are children living in foster care identified within the EDI data? Not so much, Jamie. The teachers do have an opportunity to add a particular comment on that front. But it's not routinely collected, so we don't have very good data in respect to that. And then the last one from Ellen up in Grand Forks. For school districts that do EDI and MDI, how soon will reports generate that make the linkages? I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to give me some information on that, because I've been away for a while. I mean, we are doing the linkages now on the research and analytic front, but I'm not sure if we have a timeline. We don't have a timeline at this point that when we'll have those specific reports out, Ellen. But what I would encourage you to do probably in about 6 weeks or so, when we're really getting the MDI data finished and ready to report on it, is to be back in touch with us, because I think there's probably some stuff that we can think with you about in terms of, as we get prepared to report, what really would be helpful for you to know. Okay, I think that's the end of the questions and the end of our time. again, so good to have all of your participation and to see so many familiar names and lots of new names on the call today. Really encourage you to be in touch with us, talk further about your questions. We'll put you in touch with resources as we're able to. So go to the website. You can find any of us under the people section, and we're all willing to take emails. So thank you very much. Bye.